Another major hurricane on its way to Florida this week and the next few days. The evacuation orders already going up as Milton is gaining strength in the Gulf of Mexico, winding up to be a Cat 3, it looks like. Yeah, coming in from that side. We'll get to all that. Here's what it looks like in Florida. Listen.
I urge Floridians to finalize your storm preparations now, enact your plan. I highly encourage you to evacuate. We are preparing, and I have the State Emergency Response Team preparing for the largest evacuation that we have seen, most likely since 2017 Hurricane Irma. But to that end, I want to go back to our basics. Evacuate if you're in an evacuation zone. If you are not in an evacuation zone and your house was built in conjunction with the Florida Building Code, which pretty much throughout the state of Florida means after 2004, you may be better just to stay in place. If you're dependent on power, you will need to evacuate. If you're dependent on a special set of circumstances, you'll need to evacuate. But if you're not one of those individuals and you're inland, not in an evacuation zone, it may be better for you to just stay in place.
Just stay in place. Figure it out. But watch the warnings. You would think with this much advance warning, FEMA would be ready. But you would be wrong. FEMA is broke, and the federal response to Helene, that hurricane, completely broken too. Destruction caused by Hurricane Helene puts an end to the lie that politics stops at the water's edge in western North Carolina, where the death toll is in the hundreds and entire communities are completely devastated or in some cases gone. The area looks like a war zone. A war zone. Today, on the one-year anniversary of the October 7th attacks, the area looks like an American version of the Middle East. Democrats refuse to stop politicizing the destruction. That they refuse to do anything constructive with regard to helping the people of North Carolina says plenty. Democrats have had the audacity to say out loud, FEMA's bankrupt. The government has money for Ukraine and Hamas, but nothing for America. That says everything, doesn't it? Democrats like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg have done nothing to improve the situation. It says all we need to know. Their first priority is not America or the principles of America first, but electing Democrats. That is their first and only priority in giving you the bill for their World Economic Forum agenda. The destruction also puts an end to LaGuardia's comment that there is no Republican or Democratic way to pick up the garbage. Wrong. That may have been true 80 or 90 years ago when LaGuardia was the mayor of New York, but today, the cities throughout America, the Democratic way is to not pick up the garbage at all, but to blame everybody else. Cleanup, emergency supplies, recovery, disaster relief. The way Democrats handle these things is abysmal. To hear Pete Buttigieg, whose entire career is a study in failing upwards, talk about these things, to hear him talk about rural communities as if they were alien. To hear little Pete is to hear a Democrat who is totally out of his depth. So much so that he would be underwater like much of western North Carolina during the storm if he were not posturing on dry land. Yeah, here's Pete Buttigieg. Listen.
You got to understand, in some of these rural communities, mountain communities, these are places where if a bridge gets taken out, the next nearest bridge might be 20, 30 or more minutes away on a good day.
Kamala Harris says she and Joe Biden have been paying close attention to what's happening in North Carolina. Does she mean she's been paying close attention to the political fallout? Because her incompetence may result in her losing the state by a huge margin? Does she believe the people of North Carolina believe her? Does she think they trust her to do what is right? Does she believe her fellow Democrats believe her? Or is this a rare issue where the Democrats and Republicans believe the same thing, namely that Harris is incompetent and has nothing relevant to say? Yeah, those in North Carolina plead for help. Kamala Harris not figuring out how to deliver relief. No, she was interested in very different things, apparently. Listen to this.
The president and I have been paying close attention from the beginning to what we need to do to make sure the federal resources hit the ground as quickly as possible. And that includes what was necessary to make sure that we provided direct federal assistance. And that work has been happening.
So after that, she made that quick photo op stop. But while millions are still suffering, Kamala's doing something completely different. A sex podcast. Call Me Daddy. Not a joke. Call Me Daddy is a sex podcast she did over the weekend. That's not a joke. She is. Listen to this.
Just, daddy gang, to put it in our TikTok terms. I have seen girls on the street walk up to men and be like, do you know where a tampon goes? Do you know how many tampons we use? Do you even know how, do you know what a X or Y or Z is of a part of our, and they don't know the answer.
I was the first vice president or president to ever in office go to a reproductive health care clinic, ever.
So this is what she's doing, giggling along on a sex podcast while millions remain without power, families are destroyed, lives are torn apart. It's perfectly obvious that some Democrats just don't care about rural and middle America. She's one of them. And to hear operative Democrat David Axelrod tell it, the devastation is a win for Democrats. He says Trump voters who've lost their homes, who have lost everything, aren't going to make it to the polls in comparison to those elite voters in Asheville, the blue dot that is Asheville, North Carolina. Axelrod sounds like his fellow Obama maniac, Rahm Emanuel, who said you never want a serious crisis to go to waste, as Emanuel was the mayor of Chicago. The statement speaks to how Democrats govern that they cannot help but misgovern. Axelrod speaks in a similar style. The takeaway is that Democrats don't care what happens to Republicans. In a word, Democrats like Axelrod and Buttigieg and Biden and Harris hate Republicans, and they hate the people that live in these places. Democrats deplore us. Put another way, Democrats want to do Western North Carolina what they say Republicans want to do with federal lands in the West, exploit it to the hilt. Forget fracking or drilling. Democrats want to convert a disaster into a source of political energy. Democrats want to harvest voters in the wake of tragedy. Here's Axelrod.
But those voters in Asheville are, they're the kind of voters who will figure out a way to vote. They're upscale, kind of liberal voters, and they're probably going to figure out a way to vote. I'm not sure a bunch of these folks who had their homes and lives destroyed elsewhere in Western North Carolina, in the mountains there, are going to be as easy to wrangle for the Trump campaign. So that's I don't know how that's all going to play out.
Yeah, there it is. Those upscale voters in Asheville will figure it out. Of course, they live in town, and those dirt chickens out in the mountains, yeah, they lost everything, so they won't figure out how to vote. No doubt Axelrod believes what he says. Too bad he refuses to let the truth intrude upon his stereotype about Trump voters. We'll see where that goes. We'll take a break and be back. Busy Monday here on the Steve Gruber Show. I'm glad you're here.